outbound sales development got 75% less efficient over that 10-year period. As the marginal cost of executing an activity gets closer to zero, then each of those channels just becomes more and more crowded, which means the ultimate return on them is going to be less. If everyone's doing that and one company spams the market, that company will win, right? Because there's going to be way less noise, and so their message is going to get cut through to everyone. You could execute the perfect playbook, follow all of the best practices to a T, and you get a donut, right? You get nothing from it.
Welcome back to another episode of Revenue Mechanics, where we dive under the hood of revenue engines, speaking to revenue leaders from around the world. And up till now, we've had people from the US, the UK, everywhere but Australia. And we still haven't had an Australian yet, but close enough with a Kiwi across the pond. Matt, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sam. It's good to be here.
Good to chat. I just wanted to jump in, as I know you kind of label yourself as a sales scientist, and that's very much in tune with how I like to look at things as well. I'm very analytical and process and number driven, but obviously there's a lot of nuance in that when it comes to sales. Working with a lot of high growth companies and the sort of companies that you're consulting to help integrate outbound motions at the moment, what are you seeing in the market right now as a big challenge that these companies are facing in this changing time and landscape that we're in?
Yeah, I think it's trying to figure out what is the next evolution, particularly in the space that we play in, which is outbound, right? So if I take you all the way back to when I kind of started in this game, it was kind of mid 2010s, and what you had at that point for a few years now was that the likes of SalesLoft and Outreach had kind of gained traction in the market and were really effective at helping companies to kind of generate demand, right? To generate sales opportunities, right? Sales engagement platforms worked really well. So the evolution of those tools was basically for the first time, you could hire a pretty unsophisticated or low skilled sales force, being SDRs and BDRs fresh out of university. You could throw them a sales engagement platform license, throw them a bunch of contact data, they could send templated emails, and then book meetings. Right? And that worked really well for a long time, probably up until the late 2010s, early 2020s. And then that started to stop working, right? Because that market just became really crowded. Everyone's inboxes got really full. There are a lot more vendors in every market and every space. And so the competition for attention became much greater. And you started to see reply rates and response rates drop off. There's some really good data from this. So the Bridge Group, I don't know if anyone has come across them before. So they're a consulting outfit based in the US. They put together a report on sales development every couple of years. And you can track this trend very clearly through the reports that they've done, right? So I went through it and went back all the way to 2012 and looked at their report every 2 years from 2012 up to 2022. And the trend was super clear. It's in 2012, a sales rep was executing on average 55 activities per day and generating 8 quality conversations, right? Amazing if we could get those numbers today, right? 55 activities per 8 conversations. Today, it's 110 activities, or sorry, today it would be worse. I haven't seen this year's report. Sorry, in 2022, it was 110 activities for 4.3 conversations. So basically what that tells us is that outbound sales development got 75% less efficient over that 10-year period. And I'd say there's probably been a similar drop in just the last 2 years alone. Right? And so, we're in the situation now where that old model, the effectiveness of it has kind of dropped off pretty substantially. Reply rates are down. And so now we're trying to figure out where we go from here. And, the current iteration of that, we could talk about that, kind of around parallel dialers and lots of, multiple domains and email addresses and things like that.
Yeah.
But feel free to jump in. I just went on a bit of a rant there.
Yeah, no, the landscape is definitely shifting. I see it on my side. I came up in not so much the outbound predictable revenue model, but more the lead gen version of the predictable revenue model of let's just jam X amount of leads into a system, and then we'll get X amount of people to call them, and then they book X amount of meetings, get X amount of sales from that, etc. And the same trend is going on. People aren't stupid anymore. They know if they're going to put their real number into download an ebook or a paper, that some person's going to hound them for the next few weeks
Yep.
multiple times a day. And that was a system I came up through, where it's probably a similar time frame over the course of the early 2010s through to the late 2010s to early 2020s. That model worked,
Yep.
but I think the thing that it really missed was it just wasn't built around the buyer. It was always built around how can we shove people into our system
Mhm.
versus how can we attract and move and progress buyers through into, and I like to call it more of like an influence conversion system, where you can influence people to come your way instead of going other ways, but rather than shoving square pegs into round holes. So when it comes to the outbound side of things, as you mentioned, the whole cadence and predictable revenue approach of make X amount of outbound emails, calls, etc., to get X amount of conversations, X amount of meetings, so on and so forth. There are still companies trying and still executing and running that model, and some are still seeing results from it, obviously because they're in business.
Yep.
But where do you see, based on you actually being in the trenches, plus obviously all the research that you do, where are you seeing that trend head over, say, the next 12 months, 2 years, 5 years?
Yeah. Well, so I think if you look at like the market generally, there's a pretty clear trend, and you can see this from kind of like the way that the vendors are trying to solve the problem. And the current like solution to it, or at least in the majority of cases, seems to be, well, let's just do more activity, right? So it's like you've kind of got, parallel dialers now. So now we dial 10 people instead of one at a time. And now we set up, as I said before, 50 domains and rotate those through, 200 Gmail or Outlook inboxes. And we just like, we increase the activity levels. Yeah, response rates are going to decline, but we should still be able to generate an effective kind of like cost per lead. That I think where that's going to go is like that is just going to keep trending down, right? And I think like the reason for that is just that as the marginal cost of executing an activity like gets closer to zero, then each of those channels just becomes more and more crowded, which means like the ultimate return on them is going to be less.
Yeah.
So yeah, that brings up an interesting question, right? Which is like, okay, well then how do you change that? How do you compete against that? And how do you make sure that you're executing outbound in a way that's actually going to deliver results? And that's a little bit more challenging. I think like the way that you have to do it and the way that we're kind of, thinking about this and trying to implement this is trying to be a lot more targeted around who we're deciding to reach out to.
Yeah.
Right? Because sales engagement platforms and all of the like technology that we've just talked about were really good at kind of like blasting the market and making sure that message found the small percentage of people that were interested enough to like bite, right? And
Yeah.
so but now you kind of have to figure out who's interested enough to bite or who's more likely to bite before you start to execute the outbound, because otherwise you're not going to be specific enough, or as like Josh Braun says, you're not going to be like crispy enough in your messaging in order to get cut through, right? And so I think like a lot more of the attention probably needs to shift to who are we deciding to reach out to and why, so that the subsequent things that come after targeting, like messaging, positioning, the approach that we take can be more dialed in based on where those people are at in market and why you're deciding to reach out to them versus someone else. But yeah.
And there's the spam cannon. I spoke to Scott Leese in the first episode of this, and he was talking about the similar issue of the spam cannon of just do more, do more, do more activity. And when he was mentioning, like, when he came up in sales, obviously he's a well-seasoned veteran now, so he's been in the game for 20 plus odd years. That did work. That was the approach that everyone took because market maturity was low, especially in the
Yep.
tech or SaaS space. When predictable revenue came out, for example, and Salesforce was the dominant force in the CRM space, obviously still are, but at that time when they were coming up, there was a very limited number of solutions that could do what Salesforce could do. So therefore, it was quite attractive for businesses. Now there's obviously much more maturity in the market. Vendors and buyers, purchasers are way more sophisticated. They're way more educated on how to find information, how to navigate a sales process. And they, as I alluded to before, like they know if they put their details in somewhere or they respond to something, they're typically going to be hounded, and they don't want to go in. Well, in my opinion, they don't want to go into a sales process that they're not in control of. They want to have that and retain and feel like they're in that control, which ties into what you mentioned of having the relevancy and the targeting of knowing who to reach out to and then when to reach out, or in terms of like depending on where they're at in their buying journey, what sort of information do we reach out to them with? And Adam, who connected us, talks about cataloging the market, of going outbound and not going outbound to set meetings,
Yep.
going outbound to actually acquire this information to
Yep.
bring back to the company and create that feedback loop. Is that a process that you guys have integrated or implemented at all?
Yeah, 100%. And another person who talks about this relentlessly on LinkedIn is Sean Sees, right? I think that's
Mm.
how you pronounce his name. And so he talks a lot about like the thing that most people get wrong with outbound is thinking that like the first cold call is about setting a meeting, when he views it as the objective of the first cold call is to get permission basically to speak again. And so, yeah, like reframing the thought in that way makes a lot of sense, I think. And so, yeah, what can we get out of the first cold call that helps us to determine whether or not this person is like even a good fit? When like timing might be, when timing probably isn't right now. So if it isn't right now, like when might it be right? Like when is this on the roadmap, right?
Yeah.
How are they currently solving the problem today? Who's involved in that, or who put that solution in place? What is it like? Do they like it? Do they not? Right. And then gathering,
Mm.
as you said, right, all of this information so that you can then, as Adam says, right, catalog the market so that we know, okay, in Q3 of next year, these are the 40 accounts that we should be approaching because we know that they're like in the sweet spot. The contract is going to be up, right? They were having these problems, and we know we can solve for that better than the current solution does. So yeah, I think like that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the challenges that we're going to have, especially from an outbound standpoint, though, is actually having those conversations, right? Because we've got outbound operates in this like, you familiar with the concept of a prisoner's dilemma?
No, I haven't heard that before.
So yeah, prisoner's dilemma. So basically, it's like, so the way it's framed is like, so you've got two people, right, and they're both being interrogated by the police, and they've got basically like three options in front of them, right? They can either, and each of them have these three options. You could admit to the crime, which means you'll do some time. You can not say anything, and you can hope that your mate doesn't say anything as well, right? Or you can say the other person did it, right? And so now in this like prisoner's dilemma that you've got, the best outcome from a game theory standpoint is for both parties to say nothing, right? They get the
Mm.
lowest combined punishment, and that puts them in the best situation from a from an outcome standpoint. The
Yep.
problem is if you just say that the other person did it, right? You can get off scot-free as long as they don't say you did it. So your personal incentive is actually like is not aligned with like the greater good. If you can kind of like
Mm.
cheat the system while everyone else plays by the rules, you win, right?
Yeah.
So how this ties into outbound is that if everyone did outbound the right way, which is like we're gonna target accounts in this specific way, we're only gonna reach out to the people that we know we can really help. We're gonna do it in like a highly personalized and relevant way. Everyone would get better results. The problem is if everyone's doing that and one company spams the market, that company will win, right? Because there's
Yeah.
going to be way less noise. And so their message is going to get cut through to everyone. They're not going to have to worry about finding like the needle in the haystack. They just prospect to the whole haystack, right? And they're going to win. And so you've kind of got like this coordination problem where like, well, you can try to do outbound in the right way, but is someone going to pick up the phone in 12 months time? Because like everyone is running a 10-line parallel dialer and everyone's getting 40 cold calls a day. And are you even
Yeah.
going to be able to get emails into someone's inbox? Because like everyone has some version of like don't accept or don't show me any emails from any email addresses I don't recognize. And so like
Mm.
you're actually like a turning point here where it's like, well, even these tactics of like thinking about doing it in a smarter way may not be possible in 12 months just based on like the fact that we've kind of like, killed the golden goose in a sense, right? Just based on
Yeah.
everyone's kind of like, their own incentives.
That's a really interesting perspective and way to look at it, because it makes a lot of sense. Like if we refer to the buyer's pyramid principle of the 3, 7, 30, 30, etc. If everyone started going after the broader side of it, the people who are problem aware or problem unaware and lower in their journey, and everyone stopped going after the 3%, as you said, that one company that does just go for the 3% and spams everyone, yeah, they're going to capture that whole market because everyone else is trying to play there. So it loses like that balance in the market. Not something that I actually haven't thought about that from that sort of context before. Have you found a methodology or approach yet to find that sort of balance, or is that something you guys are still
Yeah,
working on?
we're trying to figure it out, right? Because I think like especially at this point, you kind of like it's all well and good to sit on podcasts and say like, oh, we'll just do less activity and like do outbound the right way, but it's like, you
Mm,
know, yeah, if connect rates, if you're prospecting into the US and your connect rates are like 3%, then like it's pretty hard to, to make outbound work without just like a shitload of activity, right?
mm,
And likewise on email, right? It's like if email response rates are, less than 1%, again, it's like really hard to make that work. And so I think that's why I mean, it's like, I don't know if anyone really has the next like evolution or version of this figured out, because you've got like clearly diminishing returns in the old approach. Um,
mm,
but if you just go out, especially for like companies that are targeting, you know, SMB or mid market, so where like ACVs are slightly lower, you could burn a lot of money taking this like, perfect outbound approach or like idealistic outbound approach and
mm.
not actually generate anything, right? So yeah, how are we trying to address it today? It's like, yeah, we're still executing a lot of volume because like there's still value there to be had, but it is trying to think, okay, 6, 12, 18 months into the future, like how is this going to change and adapt, and like how do we need to, what do we need to figure out in order to keep helping our customers win? But yeah, I mean, I don't have the answers yet, right? So it's like it's still
Yeah.
evolving. Yeah.
And there's so much nuance to it as well. Like as you mentioned before, like what country are you targeting, what vertical are you in, industry maturity, size of company, all of these variables and factors could lean into like hey, a mass market approach. And you mentioned it obviously before we jumped on about AI,
Yep.
pressing a button and just hitting the mass market might actually be a more effective approach than building thought leadership, going in catalog and
Yep.
doing those early stage components because you're just getting to people that have a problem right now,
Yep.
such as what Salesforce did back in the day when CRMs were quite new.
Yep.
And it's the same from the marketing side. And like I primarily play in the paid space, and most of the time I recommend for companies not to leverage paid advertising until they've established a message in market, they've got some sort of proven sales system, etc. But there are also still companies that run ebook ads, get leads, call those leads, book meetings, make sales, and are profitable.
Yep.
So it's like this dichotomy of whether there is no one size fits all answer, which then creates obviously a lot of the tension you see online with LinkedIn, vocal people on LinkedIn that like this is dead, etc. And one thing I try to sit in the middle of is like because I've found in sales and marketing that nothing is really binary. It's never like black and white. This is exactly how to do it. This is the only way to do it. And to that point of what you mentioned before, there's just no one size fits all approach, which I guess is why it's a marketplace. It's a competition. It's not everyone's going to win, and that's the unfortunate side of the game. Is not everyone will win. You've got to know your space, etc. So for the companies that you guys work with, are you do you guys implement more of a say for your own company to acquire clients? Which style of approach have you found most suitable for you in the B2B space?
Yeah, so for us and our clients, it's like exactly what you just said, right? So if we're running outbound for a customer, it is very like we just follow what the data tells us, right? Which is like, okay, well, like
Mm,
what is the approach that we should take here? What is like the structure of the company? How quickly or how often does the market like purchase solutions like this? And then we'll
mm,
develop like an outbound strategy that fits, right? So for some of our customers, they're very like enterprise focused. They're selling, solutions that a company might only change, every like 7 to 10 years. And so at that end of the spectrum, right, it's very much a like catalog the market, figure out the solutions they're using at the moment, figure out a like kind of a nurture plan, and then provide essentially like intel back to our client and their sales team to go, this is what we found, this is what they're using. Here's the kind of the here's the playbook that it fits into on your side of the business based on the info we've uncovered, right? And then at
yeah.
the other end, you've got stuff that's like much more transactional, where on the first call we're trying to schedule meetings because we know like this is something that you can buy next week if you're a good fit, if you have the problem now. because we know that like, people can purchase the stuff quickly, they can implement it quickly and see results, right? So it's like very dependent on the customer and like the typical kind of like sales cycle or buying journey and ACVs the space that they play in. For us, it's probably more like, we need to position ourselves as, and it's probably more less transactional. So when we're going outbound, it's more so positioning sales science as an organization that like understands the market, right?
Mm.
Because you know outbound isn't something that you're going to like just buy because we say like we can help you get leads, or at least if you know if a company is making a decision to run outbound just because they think we can help them generate leads and they didn't initially have outbound as part of the strategy, they're probably not a good customer for us, right?
Yep.
They're going to churn quickly because like it's just like they're just not a good fit. They haven't thought about it. We need to be in the position to say, okay, like when this is right for you, when you're ready to do this, you're going to come to us because like we understand the space better than anyone else. So it's much more like nurture, getting content in front of them, sharing guides with them, sharing kind of like calculators with them, making sure that we can position ourselves as like, hey, we know this space better than anyone else in this market, and that's why you should work with us when you're ready, right?
Yeah.
That's the idea. Yeah.
It's very much the same on my side, simply due to one, the expectations being set. Like it's more of a pain in the ass for us, of like for my company to take on a client that isn't educated, that doesn't really understand how to leverage paid advertising, that is just coming in with the, I just want to run ads because I want more leads.
Yep.
Well, have you ran ads before? No. What do you have working now? Not much. Yeah, you're probably not a great client to work with. It might work, and if you've got cash to burn, we can experiment and test. But I guess in the short term, they tend to result for the most part in headache clients, which
Yeah.
we just don't take them on
Yeah.
if they're in that sort of early stage. Would you say there's an argument to potentially have a blend of both? Example being, say, I work with a few like high end gyms and wellness centers, and we do run very direct response operated campaigns for like say challenges or promotions, etc. But we also on the front end will leverage content, educational content, etc., to just saturate that local market with the experiential, or with the experience of seeing the brand and learning from the brand, so that when they do see the direct response, ideally there's a bit more affinity and a more, obviously, better follow through rate. Have you found with any clients, or tested with any clients, the balance of cataloging versus and like that high volume approach at the same time, and finding a balance in there?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing with outbound is that like because you know 70 or 80% of like the way that we interact with a customer is on the phone, you can kind of just do both at the same time, right? Because you're
Mm,
having a conversation. It's like,
yeah.
we can position, what we do and the problems we typically solve, or that, our clients typically solve and how they do that. And then based on the way that the prospect reacts is like, okay, well then where is this call going to go? Does this now become an information gathering call because there isn't an opportunity here? Or is this like, a hair on fire problem that like they actually need to get solved now and they don't know how to do it? And so, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, the good thing about outbound is that like, yeah, you can do both at the same time, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Depending on how the conversation's going. Yeah.
And then with that, how do you align KPIs? Say you have a company that comes in, and this might come down to like the expectation setting, but a company that comes in and it's like, we want to get X amount of meetings, etc., added to our calendar each week.
Hmm.
Then obviously that meeting based KPI misaligns the incentive, where if a prospect is, say, more suited to an information gathering path based on where they're at, does the seller then force through the meeting because they're incentivized to get the meeting? How have you found navigating that challenge?
Yeah. Yeah. That can be tricky, right? Just especially at the outset, just because like we typically haven't run outbound, well, almost never have run outbound like to this exact market with this
Mm,
exact product type to this exact like persona, right? And so being able to like the way that we position it to our customers is just that like we don't know what we're going to be able to generate, right? Like we haven't done
yeah.
it. Have you guys done it? Have you got any metrics that you can point to? It's like, no, we haven't done it to any real degree. It's like, okay, well then you just need to come on the journey with us, right? And we're just super
Yeah.
transparent around like what we're finding, right? So the KPIs that we typically set, especially early on with customers, are more so like activity and like outcome based, which is like, hey, we'll take 500 prospects a month that we think are a really good fit from, I don't know, let's call it 200 to 250 accounts. We'll
Yeah.
run them through this process, right? And then we'll track all of the outcomes, right? And then every week we'll get together again and we'll go, okay, here's what we've seen, right? Here's the connect
Mm.
rates. Here's where the prospects exiting on the cold calls. Here's the intel that we're finding, right? Here's like the LinkedIn acceptance rates. Here's what we're finding with messaging there. And then we can just like be super agile and adjust and go, hey, look, it's probably not the right fit for this market with this messaging to try to like book meetings now, right? Why don't we just focus more on, cataloging or gathering information so that we can then, re-engage them in 2 or 3 months time. So it very much is like, we have to figure it out as we go, because it's like, yeah, like you said, this is one of the other things I always think about is like, my dad's a builder, right? And the great thing about being a builder is that like, when you've got a plan for a house, if you follow the plans, the house gets built,
You end
right?
up with a house.
And the owner's happy, and it's like, oh, it looks exactly like this is awesome. It's like, it looks exactly like
Yeah.
we thought it would look. And outbound or in sales and in marketing, like that just doesn't exist, because like each situation is unique. So you could like execute the perfect playbook, follow all of the best practices to a T, and you get like a donut, right? You get nothing from it. And so it's just like, well, it just doesn't exist. You haven't gone to market with your product to your market in this exact market situation, right, today before. And so you just have to go on a journey with us, and we'll be fully transparent around what we're finding. We'll make the adjustments as we go, but like, we have no idea what this is going to generate, right? It's just like, we got to
Yeah.
figure it out as we go. Yeah.
And I was chatting with, do you know Kellen Casebeer? Have you
Yeah,
met him
I've
on
seen him again. Like, haven't spoken to him, but
LinkedIn?
he's got good stuff. He's a good follow on LinkedIn for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I had him on a couple of weeks back, and he shared pretty much the exact same sentiment of like, if when a company engages them, it's like, this is an experiment, especially if we're implementing outbound for the first time. And if you can't engage this experiment for 12 months without needing an immediate, like a direct ROI, then don't engage the experiment. Because as you said, we could do all the right things, all the best practices, and still land on a donut.
Yep.
And it's the same in the marketing world. And I think it kind of gives people like you and I, companies like you, us, more of an advantage of actually just being upfront. So like, I tell all prospects and people I speak to that first 90 days we're data gathering, we're trying to set benchmarks and trying to understand where this fits in the ecosystem, where paid advertising fits in your world. Um, and ideally, like if they've got something brewing, like some sort of fire going, we can just amplify what they've already got going and see how that responds at a wider market, at a colder market. And then the following 90 days is about refining those benchmarks and so on and so forth. But
Mm-hmm.
but I always say to prospects, if you're coming into this wanting an immediate ROI and you want us to produce ROAS and all that sort of stuff, that's it's not how the game works. I know people want to sell you on that, but it's not a game I want to play.
Yep.
So, and that gets a way better response from prospects where they're actually like, wow, someone's actually being honest for once.
Yeah.
Um,
I think the market is just saturated with like, we'll generate, 40x ROI, or you don't pay us anything, right? It's just like, all of those claims, if you're somewhat sophisticated, are just so unbelievable that it's
yeah.
like, it doesn't like, yeah, if you're selling to someone who knows business, right, it's just like, how can you guarantee that, right? It's just like, it doesn't make any sense, you
And
know?
in your space, like there's we will guarantee 20 additional meetings a month or a week or whatever.
Exactly.
And actually, I think it's scheduled for tomorrow. I got a post on this because I don't trust any. Well, the only time I can see a marketing or sales based guarantee working is if there is dual incentive of like, hey, we're going to be a revenue partner and we're both going to take the risk and we're both going to grow together. So we'll benefit on the upside just as much as you. But if this fails, then we both fail. And outside of that, anything that's ROI based guarantee, first page SEO guarantee, meetings book guarantee, they said anyone that has a level of sophistication will know that it's BS. And I've seen and experienced so many companies that do sell this BS, and then there's all the little fine print in there of needs to have this, and you didn't hit the guarantee. Well, the subsection this disqualifies you from getting that guarantee anyway,
Yeah.
and it's just a sign of like amateurs really
Yep. I
when
mean,
they
even if there isn't, let's even if you take the fine print out of it, right? Like, let's say the person like reads the contract and it's the contract is legit, the incentive kind of like still isn't there, right? Because you can
yeah
imagine the business model for the service provider in that case is basically just like, we'll sign 1,000 clients and it will fail for 990 of them, right? Running our like cookie cutter method. And we don't care because we'll get 10 that will work for, and it's super easy, right? Because we just do the same thing. And like we know we're going to be able to sign the next 100 clients next month because there's another 100 suckers that will just think it's going to work, right?
Yeah,
And
that'll
it's
buy
like it
into
doesn't
this.
matter if our churn's 99%. It doesn't matter because like we don't spend any time or money on trying to make the non-performant campaigns work. And so I think that's
Yeah,
like that's what people have to recognize they're getting into is like if the service provider doesn't make anything, if it doesn't work, there is zero incentive on their side to like actually try to make it work, right?
and
Because it's just like
continue to push through.
they're just throwing like good money after bad basically if they do that.
And typically with the way that they're structured, say it's in your space where it's we guarantee you 20 meetings a week, it always incentivizes short-term
Yep,
behavior. So like
exactly.
in business, obviously, we're not, yeah, if you're playing in business, you're more like an index fund, right? Or you're trying to just ride the market and you want to stay in the game for long enough to win, not day trade every single day to like, how can we squeeze out some more profit today?
Yep.
And if you hire a firm like an outbound firm that says, hey, we'll get you 20 plus additional meetings a week, and they just, people that should be cataloged and information gatherers, they're like, oh, we'll just oversell this person and slide them into the meeting so we hit the guarantee. It can actually do a lot more harm to a business than actual benefit.
Yep. 100%. 100%. Yeah, if they just send, 8 really bad cold emails to everyone in your market over the space of like 30 days, like you know,
Then you burn
or
the whole market.
yeah, or even worse, and you see this often is like, oh, they'll take control of like the CEO's LinkedIn profile and message
Mm,
everyone on LinkedIn through the CEO's, like get connected with them and then message everyone like a terrible copy and paste like LinkedIn automation sequence. And like what people fail to recognize there is like you can't get rid of that message history, right? And so like if you in 18 months time decide that you want to go back and re-engage that person because now you can see from some signal that they're in market, like now you can really help them. Like you go to message that person and there's just this like 8 really bad like over salesy messages that have come from you, right? That was sent by that LinkedIn automation partner. And so as soon as you
yeah,
message that person again, they open up the messages and they're like, oh, this guy again. Like there's no way I'm
yeah,
engaging him, right? It's just like,
yeah.
yeah, the the,
He's
the
already
cost,
done it dirty.
yeah, the cost is like there's some long term cost to like to some of that stuff that I think people don't quite fully think through.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and so it presents a challenge for people like you and I and Callan and Adam, etc. That do want to, obviously, or don't want to. We do things right by the client and set right expectations, etc. But then there are the companies out there that are willing to put these guarantees and, as you say, like burn the market, do a lot of short-term damage to a business, but they don't care as long as they make money.
mm.
When you speak to clients or prospects that maybe have been conditioned by these wild expectations, uh, how do you navigate that conversation to get them grounded back into reality?
Yeah. It's kind of I take them through often just like the exact conversation that we've just had, right? Which
Mm.
is just like, and then if at the end of that, if they still don't think that, if they still want us to give a guarantee, all right, or they still like expect us to be able to put a number down on paper, then it's just like you're just not a good fit because like you're obviously not sophisticated enough to understand that like based on everything we've talked about that's not possible, right? And so that's an indication to me that like you're not going to be a good client. You're going to be difficult to manage throughout the next like 30, 60, 90 days as we're getting this stuff figured out. And so it's probably better that we just like go separate ways there. But generally,
Yeah,
when I have that conversation with people, right, they get it and they're like, yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So sure, it's like most people get it, but it's like until you've had that, that conversation, it's not obvious from the outset like that you can connect those dots, right? So
yeah, 100%. And or even if they've experienced the pain of, say, utilizing a guaranteed based service to realize that, oh, actually they are full of shit.
yeah,
And like obviously Alex Hormozy, which I love Alex's work and what he's doing, but he sort of pedestaled the whole guarantee thing with his $100 million offers approach and book. And there are some cases where a guarantee obviously does make the offer much better. As
yep,
you mentioned with your dad, we guarantee you by the end of this contract, you will have a house.
yeah,
You don't
yeah,
have a
exactly,
house.
yeah, yeah,
That makes sense. If it's a binary thing of like, hey, if we do this, we're giving you this. And if we don't give you the house, then that's our fault. But in a non binary space, such as sales and marketing, where everything's evolving, everything's ever changing. It's just something that is unrealistic to expect or want because the landscape's just too difficult to, well, the landscape's changing every single day and every single month.
Yeah. I think unless you play in like a very like defined niche, right? So it's like, let's just say, for example, that, for whatever reason, you had some unique like distribution advantage into construction companies in Australia, right? And for whatever
Mm,
reason, like, you like theoretically you could have this, right? Which is like you had an outbound agency that like the only organizations that they sold to was like construction companies based in Australia between a certain size, right? And so like in that situation, that outbound agency could get to understand the market so well that like they know based on the product that they're representing and the market that they sell to every single day what they're going to be able to generate. I think in that situation, like a guarantee could make sense, right? Because it's like, well, this is the only thing we do, and it's like so well defined and niched that like you could in that situation it could make sense. But yeah, in most of the situations where you see it, it's just like, oh, just any B2B. Yeah, your market is this. It's like you sell to any small business. Oh yeah, sure. We can generate 20 meetings a month, right? Like,
yeah. And it's obviously a a challenge I have a gripe with, and it's in the space, not just guarantees, but just the wild expectations that people are set with. But at the same time, as said before, like it gives an opportunity for people that are willing to just tell it how it is and not set those false expectations to bring on great long lasting clients because they know what the bad looks like.
yeah,
And the churn, for example, the first company I ever did sales in did this sort of approach. Oversold, underdelivered, um, made good front end revenue, but on the back end, churn, client complaints. There's so much damage control going on that the company got stuck for ages, and eventually that company went out of business because a bunch of clients banded together and went after them. But the company was stuck for a very long time because the bucket was just leaking off the
yep,
back end
yep,
because they didn't have this long-term mindset of experimenting. Hey, we're trying to unlock a channel because just like paid advertising, outbound's just another channel, right? It's
yep,
not a magical key to the kingdom of business success.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
we'd all be multi-billionaires by now,
yeah,
but it's just a channel, and like as you said, for some businesses the channel is a great channel, for others it's not. But if you want to unlock it, you've got to play in it
yeah,
first.
100%. You've got to figure it out. Yeah, and this is why I'm worried about the rise of like the AI SDR kind of like space, right? Is because again, you've got like the marginal cost of delivery of each, of an additional outbound message going even further down, right? Because now you don't even need like the SDR to go and like pull the leads out of Zoom Info and put it in the sequence and be sitting there to reply. It's just
Mm.
like the agent just does all of it. And so you get like an order of magnitude reduction in the cost to execute outbound messaging. And so in that situation, it's like if I'm running an AI SDR company, I can make those like 20 meeting guarantees even easier, right? Because it's like I don't even need any headcount on my side. I just like push my bot button and it just goes and does it. And again, it's like it's going to work for 5% of the market and they're going to get really good results. And then so the AI SDR company is going to be able to show all these like glossy testimonials. And then the other
Yeah,
95% who have like pushed the like Ozempic easy button, it's not going to work for them. And then the market's just going to get even more saturated with like rubbish. And so, yeah, I don't know.
yeah.
It's going to be an
I heard,
interesting like 12 to 18 months for sure.
yeah, I heard Tim Ferriss and Kevin Rose talking about this of like because obviously similar to or the exact trend that you saw in outbound and have looked at through those studies where people have just been spammed with calls, emails, etc. So response rates, open rates, etc. have just gradually been on a decline over the last decade. Now install AI that can 10x, 100x that volume of stuff that's going out. And from a prospect's perspective, once, like maybe for the first 12 to 12 months, 2 years or so, before people become aware of it, you might not realize that it's an AI on the other phone. But once people start to realize and have doubt and don't even know if they're talking to a human or a robot, I can only imagine the damage that's going to have to outbound sort of activities. Are you future proofing in any way or thinking about these sort of concepts to obviously protect sales science in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think the calling channel will be a trickier one for them to get into, just because I can see that's probably a space that, like, and I think it's already illegal in some jurisdictions, which is like you can't have a
Mm,
bot making calls, right? So like the phone may be a channel that's protected. And saying that, like, you're like, I just still think probably response rates. So there's a couple of dynamics here, right? You've got more of the decision makers in the workforce becoming like millennials and Gen Zs, who are
mm,
less likely to pick up the phone, right?
yep.
Just as like a rule of thumb anyway. And so you're going to get decreasing connect rates over time based on the like demographic shift of decision makers.
Mm,
But then at the same time, on the kind of like supply side of cold calls, if you want to call it that, is it's like the rise of parallel dialers
yep.
and the phone validation service providers, right? Like the likes of like Phone Ready Leads or Sure Connect or whatever it is. Like, the way that those guys figure out whether or not you pick up the phone is to like call you 10 times, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, so now, like, instead of getting one cold call from the like rep who wanted to speak to you, now you get 10 calls from like Phone Ready Leads to figure out whether you pick up before the rep calls you. And so all of
Yeah.
that, like all of those additional calls going on in the ecosystem, like also compounds. So there's a long way of saying, like, I don't know, right? It's like, what are we doing to protect, like, moving forward? Is like, I don't know the answer yet. I still think there will still be space and there will be ways to get connected. I think like LinkedIn is actually a channel that we're like still pretty bullish on. The reason for that is that
Yep.
the amount of LinkedIn outreach that you can do is like rate limited, right? Because you can only send so many connection requests a week. The predominant approach on LinkedIn that people take is still one of automation, which is like you just
Mm,
set up one of those LinkedIn automation tools. And so we
spam,
go, what's that? Sorry?
spam, spam, spam.
Yeah,
Kind of.
exactly, right? It's like the same message to everyone. Those are really easy to spot. So what we do on LinkedIn is like we go very personalized there, right? So it's like
Mm,
personalized video message, which is embedded into the DMs, followed by LinkedIn audio message, which is embedded in the DMs. The reason that we use those two communication methods is the only way you can send them is using the LinkedIn mobile app, which means you
mm,
can't automate the sending of it.
yep.
Right? And so because you can't automate the sending of it, most sales teams, and this is like the funniest thing ever when I tell people about our approach, they're like, oh, but how do you scale it? It's like, well, what do you mean by scale it? It's like, well, how do you like
Yeah.
automate this? And it's like, well, that's the point, right? Is like that you can't.
Yeah.
Um, like so doing things, it's probably just like, and so where does that lead me? It's probably like, well, how can you figure out how to do more things that like don't scale? Um,
Mm,
so that because if you can concentrate on doing that activity, that means that less people are going to be doing it, right? Because the mindset that everyone has now is like it needs to be done at scale. We need to find a way to automate it. We need to do it at a way that's like lower cost to deliver. So can you figure out touches and plays that aren't scalable so that you can get cut through? Um, but at the same time, this kind of like takes us back to the beginning. Is like the only way that you can do that in a way that makes like cost per lead or customer acquisition costs makes sense is if all of that activity is going to people that are like the perfect fit, right? The people that you can help. And so that any conversation with them, whether they buy now or in 24 months time, is a one that you want to have, right? Because
yeah.
like if you spend time executing highly personalized, like really time consuming outreach to people that just like will never buy from you, there's like probably no better way to just like light money on fire than to do that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Just like pouring money into ads to get a bunch of problem unaware people to into your database to chase around with calls.
Yep. Yep.
Same
Exactly.
concept.
Exactly right. Yep.
But I like that approach, like of going up or building your systems around like the high barrier to entry
Yeah.
sort of place, so that people can't just simply automate, replicate, etc. Which I think, as we've sort of discussed throughout the call, will become more and more valuable the more of these lower barrier to entry plays get executed and flogged to death. I know we're starting to run short on time. Just as a parting question, what does the next, say, 12, 24 months look like for Matt and for Sales Science?
Yeah. So it's probably just trying to mull over like the answer to that question, right? Which is like we haven't really answered this in this call, but it's like, yeah, what is the outbound landscape going to look like, and how can we stay ahead of that so that like our customers don't have to figure it out, right? Like the reason that people work with us is because they want to use outbound as a channel, but they've got other things to think about, right? We're typically working with like fairly early stage SaaS companies. And so
Yep.
they're still figuring out product, they're still figuring out customer success, they're still figuring out like, their sales processes internally. And so if we can handle this outbound piece for them and they don't have to go and build that from scratch and figure out how to make it work, then like we both win. And so
Yep.
yeah, it's just like constantly just trying to think like one step ahead of the market and trying to position like, okay, yeah, where is it going? How do we stay ahead of the curve? How do we make sure that at the end of the day, we can keep having conversations with the people that our prospects want to sell to at some point, right? So that we can either A, gather information that's relevant to them, or B, get them into a meeting. So yeah, continuing to do that. And then, my job now, which is a lot of fun, is like I get to do stuff like this, right? Which is like, go on podcasts and try to build awareness for the work that we're doing. And then, our amazing operations team kind of like executes all of the stuff in the background. So yeah, just continuing to kind of like try to, yeah, build awareness, make sure that people know who we are, so that if they're looking for help, that they know that we're someone that might be able to help them.
Yeah, and if anyone listening to this or watching this back wants to follow this train of innovation that you go on over the next couple of years, where's best to find you and follow you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, I'm pretty active there, active most days. So yeah, LinkedIn would be the best spot.
Yep. Awesome. All right, Matt. Well, thank you for jumping on. I'm sure we could probably go on for another hour on different topics and areas, but we'll have to do this again sometime, maybe in 6, 12 months' time, once you maybe have figured out that
Yeah,
solution to where the outbound game's at. But it was a pleasure having you on, man. And yeah, look forward to chatting again soon.
yeah. Cheers, mate. Thank you.